Melissa Martin stood in the crowded emergency room, her 6-year-old son trembling in her arms, while doctors pleaded for immediate authorization to begin life-saving surgery. Then Anthony Walker arrived. Dressed for a business dinner instead of a family crisis, he refused to pay a single dollar for their son's treatment. In front of frightened parents, nurses, and physicians, he called the operation a financial mistake and walked away without looking back. No one in that hallway realized the quiet woman he had just humiliated had already become the undisclosed owner of the very hospital where his cruelty echoed through every corridor. By morning, silence would begin telling a very different story. If you believe compassion should never be measured by money, share where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. I'd love to know where this story reaches you. And if stories about quiet courage and justice speak to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next journey. Melissa Martin had long ago learned that the quietest people in a room often carried the heaviest burdens. Most who met her for the first time saw only a gentle woman in her mid-30s with neatly tied chestnut hair, calm hazel eyes, and a wardrobe so modest that few would ever imagine she possessed anything of great value. She spoke softly, smiled politely, and rarely interrupted anyone. In social gatherings, conversations flowed around her rather than through her, and she seemed perfectly content to remain unnoticed. Anthony Walker had once claimed that this was what he loved most about her. Later, it became the reason he believed she would never leave. The narrator already knew what Anthony could not yet see. His greatest mistake had never been underestimating Melissa's intelligence. It had been mistaking her patience for dependence. 6 years earlier, when they married in a quiet ceremony outside Boston, friends described them as the perfect couple. Anthony was already building Walker Medical Technologies into an ambitious medical equipment company, while Melissa had recently completed an MBA with a concentration in healthcare administration. Professors who had worked with her believed she possessed remarkable analytical instincts and an unusual ability to identify organizational problems long before others noticed them. Several hospital systems had offered her promising management positions. She declined every one. Anthony had convinced her that their future required one person to focus entirely on the family while the other pursued business without distraction. It sounded reasonable then. Melissa believed marriages sometimes required sacrifice, and she never viewed sacrifice as weakness. She resigned before accepting her first executive position. Anthony promised that one day, when the company became successful enough, she could return to any career she wished. That day never came. Instead, each passing year quietly narrowed her world. At first, Anthony simply suggested that she allow him to manage their finances because, as he often explained, investments and taxes were complicated. Melissa trusted him completely. She signed the necessary paperwork without hesitation. Months later, he encouraged her to close her personal investment accounts. Then he recommended selling a small condominium she had inherited from her grandmother, arguing that maintaining separate assets made no sense for a married couple. Melissa agreed. She believed marriage meant partnership rather than accounting. Only much later did she realize partnership required transparency from both people, not only one. Anthony never denied her food, clothing, or basic necessities. Instead, he controlled something less visible. Every major purchase required his approval. Every family vacation depended on his schedule. Every financial decision belonged to him. Whenever Melissa questioned an expense related to their home or to Lucas, Anthony responded with the same calm confidence. "I'm protecting our future." Eventually, she stopped asking, not because she agreed, because arguments accomplished nothing. Silence, however, revealed everything. Melissa developed an unusual habit during those years. Every evening after Lucas had fallen asleep, she sat alone at the kitchen table with a leather notebook. She wrote dates, conversations, promises, unexpected expenses, business trips, Appointments Anthony missed. Words he probably forgot moments after speaking them. She never intended the notebook to become evidence. Writing simply helped her organize thoughts that otherwise refused to rest. She believed facts deserved preservation, even when emotions changed. That quiet discipline would one day become more valuable than anyone imagined. Lucas Walker, however, remained the brightest part of her life. At 6 years old, he possessed endless curiosity about the world. He asked why birds flew in groups, why rain smelled different during summer, why doctors wore blue instead of white, why stars disappeared each morning. Melissa answered every question patiently, even when she admitted she didn't know the answer. Together, they searched for explanations. Anthony rarely joined those conversations. His work demanded constant travel. Investor meetings, industry conferences, negotiations, networking dinners. Whenever he returned home carrying expensive gifts, Lucas smiled politely before running back toward his mother to tell her about something he had discovered that day. Anthony noticed. He simply interpreted it differently. Children, he believed, naturally preferred the parent who spent more time at home. He never wondered why. Lucas had been born with a congenital heart condition. Fortunately, modern medicine allowed children like him to live active lives, provided regular examinations, detected changes before they became dangerous. Melissa never missed an appointment. She knew every medication dosage, every specialist, every laboratory result, every emergency warning sign. She organized medical records with meticulous precision inside labeled folders. Anthony attended the first few consultations after Lucas was born. As business expanded, he attended fewer. Eventually, he asked Melissa to summarize appointments instead. She always did. He rarely asked follow-up questions. The narrator already understood another truth Anthony had overlooked. Love was measured less by dramatic declarations than by ordinary consistency. Melissa understood Lucas's condition because she chose to learn it. Anthony assumed everything remained under control because someone else carried the responsibility. Neither parent imagined how quickly ordinary routines could disappear. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon in early autumn, Melissa picked Lucas up from school. The drive home followed its usual rhythm. Lucas talked excitedly about a science experiment involving magnets. He laughed when describing how one classmate accidentally glued 2 pieces of cardboard together. Melissa smiled. For nearly 20 minutes, life appeared completely ordinary. Then Lucas stopped talking. She glanced toward the passenger seat. His face had become unusually pale. "You okay, sweetheart?" He nodded weakly. "My chest hurts." Melissa's hands tightened around the steering wheel. She had heard those words before. Never with that expression. Within seconds, Lucas struggled to breathe. His small fingers pressed against his chest. Sweat formed across his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. Melissa immediately turned toward the nearest hospital. Her movements remained controlled. Inside, panic rose like cold water. She spoke calmly to Lucas the entire drive. "Stay with me. We're almost there. Keep looking at Mommy." He tried. His eyelids grew heavier. Traffic lights suddenly seemed endless. Every passing minute stretched unbearably long. Melissa ignored ringing notifications on her phone. Nothing mattered except reaching the emergency department. When she finally pulled beneath the hospital entrance canopy, nurses rushed outside with a wheelchair before she had completely stopped the vehicle. Someone recognized the urgency immediately. Doctors surrounded Lucas. Questions came rapidly. Medical history, medications, previous surgeries. Melissa answered everyone without hesitation. Years of careful preparation suddenly became life-saving knowledge. As hospital staff hurried Lucas toward emergency evaluation, Melissa remained only a few steps behind until automatic security doors separated families from treatment areas. The silence that followed felt almost unbearable. Dr. Emily Carter emerged several minutes later. Her expression remained professional, but urgency showed clearly in her eyes. "We're stabilizing him now," she said carefully. "But preliminary findings suggest significant changes from his last examination." Melissa felt her heartbeat quicken. "What does that mean?" "It means we need additional imaging immediately." Dr. Carter paused only briefly. "And there's a strong possibility Lucas will require emergency surgery tonight." Melissa closed her eyes for 1 second. Only one. When she opened them again, fear remained, but it no longer controlled her voice. "What do you need from me?" The physician handed her several authorization forms. "We'll explain everything as we move forward." Melissa accepted the clipboard without asking how much the procedure would cost. There would be time for numbers later. Right now, only one question mattered. Would her son survive? Somewhere else in the same city, Anthony Walker continued presenting financial projections inside a luxurious private dining room, completely unaware that the most important decision of his life was already moving toward him faster than he could possibly imagine. The emergency department had seen countless families arrive, carrying fear in different forms. Some arrived shouting, some arrived praying, some collapsed before they reached the admissions desk. Melissa Martin did none of those things. She stood beside the nurse's station with the authorization forms held neatly in both hands, her breathing slow and deliberate. Only the faint trembling in her fingers betrayed the storm she was forcing herself to contain. Behind the double doors, 6-year-old Lucas Walker was surrounded by physicians and nurses, moving with practiced urgency. Monitors beeped. Medical carts rolled across polished floors. Orders were spoken in short, precise sentences. No one wasted a second. Dr. Emily Carter returned after reviewing Lucas's scans with the pediatric cardiac team. "I'm going to be completely honest with you," she said. Melissa nodded. "I'd rather hear the truth. The pressure inside Lucas's heart has increased significantly. One of the repaired valves isn't functioning the way we expected." Melissa remained silent. "We believe surgery gives him an excellent chance of recovery." Excellent chance, not certainty. Melissa understood the difference. "But we can't wait until tomorrow," Dr. Carter continued. "Every hour increases the risk." Melissa immediately reached for the consent papers. "Tell me where to sign." Dr. Carter hesitated. "There is one more matter." Melissa looked up. "Our financial services department needs to process the admission before we proceed." The words sounded almost apologetic. The physician clearly disliked having to interrupt a medical emergency with administrative procedures. Melissa understood. Hospitals had rules. Doctors did not always write them. "I'll take care of it," she answered quietly. A financial coordinator named Sarah Jenkins escorted Melissa into a private consultation office just off the emergency waiting area. Sarah's voice remained gentle. "I know this is overwhelming." Melissa nodded. Sarah turned the computer screen toward her. "Your insurance covers a substantial portion of the procedure." Melissa felt a brief moment of relief. Then Sarah continued. "However, because of the specialized surgical team and the equipment involved, the estimated patient responsibility before surgery is approximately $280,000. The number settled into the room without emotion. Melissa didn't react immediately. She simply looked at the estimate. Not because she doubted it, because she wanted to understand every line. Sarah quickly added, "This isn't necessarily the final amount." Melissa finally spoke. "What options do we have?" "We can arrange financing." We can verify additional insurance. If a family member is able to authorize payment today, the process moves much faster. Melissa thanked her. Then she stepped into the hallway and reached for her phone. Anthony. The first call went unanswered. She waited exactly 30 seconds before calling again. Voicemail. She tried a third time, again. Nothing. Melissa sent a text. Lucas is in emergency surgery. Please call me immediately. No response. She tried once more. Still nothing. Inside a luxury restaurant across the city, Anthony Walker placed his phone face down on the polished table. Around him sat investors, executives, and potential international partners. A presentation displaying projected revenue from Walker Medical Technologies filled the large screen behind him. One vibration, then another. Anthony glanced briefly at the screen. Melissa. He pressed silence. This evening, Anthony said confidently to the room, is about growth, not distractions. The investors smiled. One of them complimented his focus. Anthony accepted the praise as though ignoring repeated calls from his wife during dinner demonstrated exceptional leadership. Nearly 40 minutes passed. Back at the hospital, Lucas's condition remained unstable. Dr. Carter approached Melissa again. We're preparing the operating room. Melissa asked the only question that mattered. Can he hold on? I believe so. Believe. Again, not certainty. Melissa thanked her. She dialed Anthony again. This time, he answered. His voice carried the noise of clinking glasses and quiet laughter. I'm in the middle of something. Anthony. Her voice remained calm. It's Lucas. Silence, then impatience. What happened? He's having emergency heart surgery. Another pause. Didn't he just have a checkup? His condition changed. You need to come. Anthony sighed. I'm hosting investors. Melissa closed her eyes. The hospital needs authorization for payment. I'll reimburse it later. They need it now. Anthony lowered his voice, clearly irritated that business associates might overhear. How much? Melissa looked at the estimate. About $280,000. The silence on the other end lasted longer this time. When Anthony finally spoke, every word sounded colder than the last. For surgery? Yes. That's insane. The doctors say it can't wait. Anthony exhaled sharply. Melissa, do you understand what's happening tonight? Our son may die. I'm finalizing a contract worth nearly $20 million. Melissa said nothing. If I leave now, months of negotiations fall apart. Our son needs you. He needs doctors. She felt something inside her quietly crack, not loudly, not dramatically, simply enough that it would never return to its previous shape. Anthony. It's your son. I know exactly who he is. His answer came without hesitation. And I also know spending nearly $300,000 tonight isn't a rational business decision. Melissa could barely believe what she had heard. This isn't business. It is if that money destroys everything I've built. A nurse opened the operating room doors in the distance. Dr. Carter looked toward Melissa, waiting. Time was running out. Please, was the only word Melissa spoke. Anthony answered with a sentence that neither she nor anyone who later heard it would ever forget. If the surgery is really necessary, you'll figure something out. Then he disconnected. Melissa lowered the phone slowly. She didn't cry. She simply stared at the blank screen for several seconds. Sarah Jenkins approached carefully. Is everything okay? Melissa placed the phone into her purse. My husband won't be coming. Sarah's expression softened. I'm sorry. Melissa nodded once. What paperwork still needs my signature? Sarah hesitated. We'll continue however we can. Before either woman could say another word, the automatic entrance doors slid open. Anthony Walker walked inside. His tailored navy suit looked untouched by the evening. An expensive watch gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. He wasn't carrying concern. He was carrying annoyance. He approached Melissa with quick, controlled steps. I had 15 minutes between meetings. Melissa simply looked at him. Dr. Carter came forward. Mr. Walker? Yes. I'm Dr. Emily Carter. She extended her hand. Anthony shook it briefly. We need to move Lucas into surgery immediately. I've already heard the estimate. Dr. Carter nodded. Our priority is saving your son's life. Anthony folded his arms. My priority is understanding why a hospital believes a child needs a procedure costing nearly $300,000. Several nurses nearby stopped what they were doing. Not because they intended to listen, because the volume of Anthony's voice made it impossible not to. Dr. Carter remained composed. The estimate reflects specialized pediatric cardiac surgery. Anthony laughed quietly. Or an opportunity to overcharge frightened parents. Melissa spoke for the first time since he arrived. The doctors are trying to save Lucas. Anthony turned toward her. You always panic. I trust them. You trust everyone. The waiting area had become unusually still. Families looked up from coffee cups. A grandfather lowered his newspaper. A young nurse froze beside the admissions desk. Anthony didn't notice. Or perhaps he didn't care. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed his wallet. Melissa thought for one impossible second that he had changed his mind. Instead, he removed a single credit card, looked at it briefly, then slid it back into place. No, his voice echoed across the waiting room. I'm not authorizing this. Dr. Carter stared at him. Mr. Walker, I refuse to spend that kind of money. Our son could lose his life. Anthony answered without lowering his voice. I will not risk my company's future over one operation. The words settled over the emergency department like ice. Melissa looked at her husband for a long moment. Then, without another plea, she turned away from him and walked directly toward the consent forms. The operating room doors closed with a soft mechanical click. For Melissa Martin, that quiet sound carried more weight than any argument she had ever endured. On the other side of those doors, surgeons were fighting to save her son's life. On this side, the man she had married stood with his hands in his pockets, irritated that his evening had been interrupted. Anthony Walker watched Melissa sign the final authorization forms. You still haven't answered one question, he said. Melissa did not look up. What question? Where exactly do you expect to find nearly $300,000? She continued reading every line before placing her signature at the bottom of the page. I'll handle it. Anthony gave a humorless laugh. With what? Melissa closed the folder and handed it back to Sarah Jenkins. I said I'll handle it. Anthony shook his head. This is exactly why people make emotional decisions. You don't even know what you're promising. Sarah quietly excused herself and carried the paperwork toward the admissions office. Neither she nor Dr. Emily Carter interrupted the conversation again. Some arguments revealed more truth when left untouched. Anthony lowered his voice. You should have called another hospital. This hospital has the specialists Lucas needs. They all say that. Melissa met his eyes. They have his medical history. Anthony shrugged. I still think you're overreacting. For a brief moment, Melissa searched his face. She wasn't searching for kindness. She already knew kindness was absent. She was searching for recognition, for even the smallest sign that the father standing before her understood what was happening inside those operating rooms. She found none. Anthony checked the time on his watch. "I've already missed enough of my dinner." Melissa asked quietly, "You're leaving?" "I have investors waiting. Our son is in surgery. The surgeons don't need me standing here." He adjusted his suit jacket. "They need money." Anthony answered immediately, "They're not getting mine." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. Melissa watched him disappear through the automatic glass doors. She neither called after him nor attempted to stop him. Some departures deserved silence. The narrator already knew something Anthony could not possibly imagine. He believed he had walked away from a hospital. In reality, he had just walked away from the future owner of the institution itself. Nearly 7 months earlier, Melissa had been sitting inside another hospital room. This one was unusually quiet. No emergency alarms echoed through the halls. No hurried footsteps passed outside. Only the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor disturbed the silence. Charles Martin looked far older than the powerful businessman whose photographs had once appeared in financial magazines across the country. Cancer had stripped away much of his strength, not his clarity. His daughter sat beside the bed, holding a notebook exactly as she always did. Charles smiled faintly. "You still write everything down?" Melissa smiled back. "You always told me memory changes." "It does. And paper doesn't." He nodded approvingly. "Good." Charles Martin had never believed wealth existed merely to accumulate larger numbers. He believed money represented responsibility. Throughout 4 decades, he had quietly built Martin Healthcare Trust into one of the nation's most respected healthcare investment organizations. Unlike many private investment firms, Charles insisted every acquisition improve patient care before increasing profits. Many investors criticized him for that philosophy. He ignored them. Hospitals existed to heal people. Profits simply allowed them to continue healing. Melissa understood that lesson long before she understood finance. As a little girl, she often accompanied her father during visits to rural clinics supported by the trust. Charles never introduced himself as an owner. Instead, he asked nurses what equipment they lacked. He spoke with janitors. He thanked receptionists. He listened to patients. On the drive home, he always asked Melissa the same question. "What did you notice?" When she was 10, she answered, "The waiting room needs more chairs." When she was 15, the nurses looked exhausted. At 22, the billing process confused elderly patients. Charles never corrected her observations. He simply asked another question. "If you were responsible, what would you improve first?" Those conversations shaped her far more than business school ever could. Now, lying in his final hospital bed, Charles reached slowly toward the drawer beside him. Inside rested a sealed envelope. "I hoped I wouldn't need this so soon." Melissa accepted it carefully. "What is it?" "My final instructions." She looked uncertain. "Dad?" He interrupted gently. "You've spent your entire life solving problems quietly. You don't need permission anymore." Melissa looked down at the envelope but didn't open it. Charles continued, "The trust belongs to you." Her eyes widened. "I don't want your money." "I know." "Then why?" "Because that's exactly why you should have it." He smiled weakly. "People who chase power rarely deserve it." "You never chased it." A week later, Charles Martin passed away peacefully. The funeral remained private. Few reporters attended. Fewer still realized that one of the largest healthcare investment portfolios in the country had just changed hands. Melissa requested no public announcement, no interviews, no press conference. She returned home, prepared Lucas's breakfast, packed his school bag, and continued living exactly as before. Anthony never asked many questions. He assumed Charles had left charitable donations rather than significant assets. Melissa never corrected him, not because she intended deception, because the legal process had only begun. 3 weeks later, Nathan Brooks invited her into his downtown Boston law office. Nathan had represented the Martin family for nearly 30 years. Gray-haired, meticulous, and remarkably patient, he greeted Melissa with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances." "So am I." He placed several thick folders across the conference table. "Your father prepared everything personally." Melissa noticed color-coded tabs separating hundreds of documents. Trust agreements, corporate ownership records, investment portfolios, healthcare partnerships, board appointments. Nathan opened the first binder. Martin Healthcare Trust currently holds controlling interests in SAS medical research companies, rehabilitation centers, outpatient clinics, and several hospital systems. Melissa listened quietly. "The estimated value," Nathan answered without hesitation. "Several $billion." She remained silent, not because the number failed to impress her, because she was thinking about her father's voice instead. "Hospitals exist to heal people." Nathan continued. "There is one matter requiring immediate attention." He slid another file toward her. Across the cover appeared the name of a regional hospital network struggling under mounting financial pressure. 4 hospitals, thousands of employees, tens of thousands of patients annually, rising debt, deferred equipment upgrades, a board divided over whether to sell. Nathan folded his hands. "They've received acquisition offers." Melissa reviewed the summaries. "What kind of buyers?" "Mostly investment groups." "What happens if they buy?" Nathan answered carefully. "They'll likely reduce staffing, close less profitable departments, increase patient costs." Melissa turned another page. Pediatric cardiology, emergency medicine, children's intensive care, each highlighted in red as possible restructuring targets. She stopped reading. "How much time do they have?" "The board plans to vote within 2 months." Melissa leaned back. "What would my father have done?" Nathan smiled. "I believe he already answered that." He opened Charles Martin's handwritten letter. Only one sentence had been underlined. "Protect the people before protecting the numbers." Melissa looked out the conference room window. Far below, traffic moved through the city without pause. Lives continued. Children became sick. Families waited for doctors. Hospitals remained more than buildings. They were promises. She finally turned back toward Nathan. "I want to meet the board." Nathan nodded once. "I thought you might." That single decision, made in complete privacy months before Lucas's emergency, had quietly begun changing every future event that neither Melissa nor Anthony yet understood. Nathan Brooks arranged the meeting without publicity. No newspapers received invitations. No business journals reported rumors. No photographers waited outside the building. Melissa Martin requested that every conversation remain confidential until every legal requirement had been completed. She had no interest in appearing on magazine covers beside headlines announcing another billionaire investor entering healthcare. She wanted something much simpler. She wanted hospitals to remain places where frightened families were treated like people instead of financial projections. 2 months before Lucas's emergency surgery, Melissa entered the headquarters of North Valley Health System through a private entrance just after sunrise. The building itself reflected years of careful maintenance, slowly giving way to financial strain. Fresh paint covered aging walls. Modern digital displays stood beside outdated furniture. Employees smiled professionally, but exhaustion lingered beneath many of those smiles. Melissa noticed everything. She always did. Margaret Sullivan, chairwoman of the board, welcomed her personally. Margaret had spent more than 3 decades leading nonprofit healthcare organizations before accepting the position during the network's financial crisis. She was respected for integrity rather than charisma. "Thank you for coming, Miss Martin. Thank you for meeting with me." Neither woman wasted time discussing wealth or status. Instead, Margaret led Melissa through several departments before the board meeting officially began. Pediatric intensive care, emergency services, cardiac rehabilitation, maternity. Melissa asked questions that surprised nearly everyone accompanying her. How many nurses worked overtime last month? Which equipment breaks down most often? How long do families wait before speaking with a financial counselor? How many children postpone treatment because of insurance delays? Margaret quietly observed every answer. Later, she admitted to another board member that Melissa had not asked a single question about projected quarterly profits. That alone distinguished her from every previous buyer. The boardroom overlooked the Boston skyline. 11 directors sat around a polished oak table. Each had received acquisition proposals from larger healthcare corporations. Some promised aggressive expansion. Others promised higher operating margins. One openly proposed closing 2 pediatric units to reduce costs. Nathan Brooks distributed Melissa's proposal. The room became unusually quiet. One director adjusted his glasses. "I'm looking for the financial restructuring section." Nathan smiled politely. "It's there." The man flipped through several pages. "I don't see any planned layoffs." "There aren't any." Another director frowned. "No department closures?" "No." A third asked, "Where are the projected labor reductions?" Melissa answered calmly, "There aren't any." The room fell silent again. Finally, Margaret looked toward her. "Then where do you expect the savings to come from?" Melissa opened a folder containing handwritten notes rather than presentation slides. Administrative duplication. She turned a page. Vendor renegotiation. Another page. Digital integration. Another. Executive consulting contracts. She paused. And unnecessary procurement expenses. One director leaned forward. "You believe that's enough?" "I know it's enough." She placed several independent audits on the table. "I reviewed 3 years of financial records." Another silence. One by one, directors began reading. Millions of dollars lost through overlapping contracts. Equipment purchased above market value. Outside consulting agreements renewed without competitive bids. Storage facilities filled with unused supplies. None of those problems required firing nurses. None required reducing patient care. Margaret slowly closed her folder. "My goodness," Melissa continued. "The people caring for patients didn't create these losses. The system did." No one argued, because the document spoke more clearly than opinions ever could. By the end of the meeting, several skeptical directors requested additional time. Margaret requested something different. "I'd like you to visit one more place." She brought Melissa to the pediatric cardiac wing. Children rested beneath colorful blankets decorated with cartoon animals. Parents slept awkwardly in reclining chairs beside hospital beds. A young boy laughed while learning to walk again after surgery. Another little girl proudly showed a nurse the drawing she had finished despite intravenous lines taped to her tiny arm. Melissa stood quietly in the hallway. Margaret spoke softly. "This department loses money every year." Melissa didn't answer immediately. Margaret continued, "Every acquisition proposal we've received recommends reducing its size." Melissa looked through the glass toward a mother reading a bedtime story to her hospitalized daughter. "What happens if you close it?" "They travel several hours for treatment." "And some won't." Margaret nodded. "Exactly." Melissa's answer came almost as a whisper. "Then it stays." Margaret studied her face. "You decided very quickly." "I actually decided years ago." 3 weeks later, the board voted. The acquisition passed unanimously. Ownership transferred to Martin Healthcare Trust. Only 7 people knew Melissa Martin had become the sole controlling owner of North Valley Health System. Every board member signed strict confidentiality agreements. Every attorney involved did the same. Public announcements identified only the trust. No individual owner appeared anywhere. Melissa insisted on that condition herself. "I don't want doctors changing how they treat me because of my name." Margaret understood immediately. Done. Back in the present, Lucas remained inside surgery. Nearly 4 hours had passed. Melissa sat alone in the family waiting room. Anthony had not returned. She didn't expect him to. The television mounted high on the wall played a morning news program with the volume muted. Coffee grew cold beside untouched magazines. Families came and went. Some cried with relief. Others prayed for miracles that had not yet arrived. Melissa opened her familiar leather notebook. For several minutes, she simply stared at the blank page. Then she began writing. 8:17 p.m. Lucas admitted through emergency department. 8:41 p.m. Dr. Emily Carter recommended immediate surgery. 9:02 p.m. Estimated payment explained. 9:18 p.m. Anthony declined repeated phone calls. 10:07 p.m. Anthony stated surgery was not worth the financial risk. 10:19 p.m. Anthony refused payment in front of hospital staff and waiting families. 10:27 p.m. Anthony left hospital. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't include emotions. Only facts. Facts survived where memories often failed. Nathan Brooks had once told her, "Courts don't measure heartbreak. They measure evidence." She had never forgotten those words. Her phone vibrated quietly. A message from Anthony. "Don't expect me home tonight. I have clients, nothing else. No question about Lucas. No request for updates. No apology." Melissa looked at the message for several seconds. Then, instead of deleting it, she took a screenshot. She emailed the image to Nathan Brooks. Subject: documentation. Less than 2 minutes later, Nathan replied. Received. Continue saving everything. No further explanation. None was necessary. Melissa placed the phone back into her purse. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, she looked through the large waiting room windows toward the city lights beyond. Somewhere inside one of those buildings, Anthony probably believed the hardest part of his evening was already over. He couldn't possibly know that every text message, every refusal, every financial decision, and every careless sentence was quietly arranging itself into a record that no explanation would later erase. Melissa still had no interest in revenge. She wanted only 2 things: for Lucas to survive, and for the truth, when its time finally arrived, to need no raised voice at all. At that very moment, deep inside the operating suite, a nurse hurried toward Dr. Emily Carter after reviewing the latest monitor readings. The surgeon looked up. Something had changed. Dr. Emily Carter looked from the heart monitor to the imaging screen without saying a word. The operating room fell into an even deeper concentration. No one panicked. Experienced surgical teams understood that silence often meant everyone was thinking at the same time. The circulating nurse adjusted the lighting, while the anesthesiologist quietly reviewed Lucas Walker's vital signs once more. After several long seconds, Dr. Carter finally spoke. "The pressure is stabilizing." A collective breath seemed to pass through the room. "But the valve isn't responding the way we expected." Another surgeon stepped closer to the monitor. "What are you thinking?" Dr. Carter studied the images again. "The repair can still work." She pointed toward a small section of the screen. "If we reinforce this area now, instead of waiting, we may prevent another surgery in the future." The chief anesthesiologist nodded. "His blood pressure is holding." Dr. Carter looked around the room. "Let's do it." No dramatic speeches followed, only disciplined work. Outside those walls, Melissa had no idea that a decision made in less than 30 seconds might spare her son years of future complications. 3 hours later, the operating room doors finally opened. Melissa stood before anyone called her name. Dr. Carter removed her surgical cap and smiled a tired smile, but a genuine one. The surgery was successful. Melissa closed her eyes. Not in celebration, in gratitude. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, her shoulders relaxed. "Thank you," Dr. Carter continued. "The next 24 hours are still important. We'll monitor him closely. But right now..." She smiled again. "I believe Lucas is going to recover." Melissa whispered, "Can I see him?" "In a few minutes." The physician hesitated before adding something unexpected. "I've performed pediatric heart surgery for almost 15 years. Melissa listened quietly. "I've seen many parents react differently under pressure." Dr. Carter chose her next words carefully. "Your son is fortunate to have you." Melissa lowered her eyes. "I just did what any mother would." Dr. Carter didn't argue. She simply nodded, because she knew that wasn't always true. Lucas was transferred to the pediatric cardiac intensive care unit just after sunrise. Machines surrounded his small bed. Monitors displayed heart rhythms. Infusion pumps worked quietly beside him. A ventilator had already been removed, allowing him to breathe on his own while sleeping. Melissa pulled a chair beside the bed. She gently touched his hand. "I'm here." Lucas couldn't answer, but his tiny fingers moved almost imperceptibly around hers. That was enough. She remained there hour after hour. She declined offers to rest. She ignored the discomfort in her back. She barely noticed meals arriving untouched. Whenever a nurse entered the room, Melissa asked thoughtful questions. What medication was changed? Is that heart rate expected? When is the next echocardiogram? She wrote every answer into her notebook, not because she doubted the staff, because information gave her purpose. Waiting without understanding felt unbearable. Waiting while learning gave her something she could control. Later that afternoon, Margaret Sullivan arrived at the hospital. Officially, she was visiting several departments as part of a routine operational review. Only Nathan Brooks knew the real reason. Margaret wanted to see Melissa, not as the new owner, as a mother. She found Melissa sitting beside Lucas exactly where Dr. Carter had left her hours earlier. Margaret entered quietly. Melissa stood. "I wasn't expecting you." Margaret smiled warmly. "I was nearby." Neither woman mentioned ownership. The nurses passing through the hallway simply assumed Margaret was another executive checking on hospital operations. She looked toward Lucas. "How is he?" "The surgery went well." "I'm relieved." Melissa nodded. So am I. Margaret noticed the untouched tray of food. You haven't eaten. I wasn't hungry. You need your strength. Melissa managed a faint smile. I'll eat later. Margaret sat beside her. For several moments, both women simply watched Lucas sleep. Final Saidrali, Margaret spoke. Last night's incident has already reached several department managers. Melissa turned toward her. I didn't intend for that. You couldn't have prevented it. Margaret's voice remained calm. Several employees witnessed Mr. Walker refusing payment. Melissa looked back at her son. I don't want anyone punished because of personal feelings. Margaret answered immediately. This isn't about feelings. It's about conduct. Melissa remained silent. Margaret continued. Our emergency staff reported everything exactly as it happened. They documented every interaction. Melissa looked surprised. They did. They're required to. Another quiet moment passed. Margaret then asked gently, Would you like those reports preserved? Melissa didn't answer immediately. She thought carefully. Finally, she nodded once. Please preserve everything. No edits. No summaries. Exactly as written. Margaret smiled, almost imperceptibly. I was hoping you'd say that. That same afternoon across town, Anthony Walker entered the headquarters of Walker Medical Technologies with the confidence of a man convinced his biggest problem had already been solved. His executive assistant, Linda Foster, hurried toward him. The investors loved last night. Anthony loosened his tie. I told you they'd understand. Linda hesitated. There is one issue. Anthony frowned. What now? The North Valley Health System Board requested additional financial disclosures. Anthony waved dismissively. That's standard. They specifically requested procurement records. So, and conflict of interest declarations. Anthony stopped walking. What exactly did they ask for? Linda handed him an email. He scanned it quickly. Please provide complete documentation regarding vendor selection procedures, pricing history, executive communications, and related party disclosures before the final contract review. Anthony looked annoyed. Who wrote this? Linda checked. It came from Rebecca Collins. Anthony recognized the name immediately. Rebecca Collins, Chief Internal Auditor. He had met her only twice. She had asked unusually detailed questions both times. She's being difficult. Linda remained cautious. They're asking for documents within 48 hours. Anthony shrugged. Fine. He tossed the email onto his desk. Accounting can handle it. But Linda didn't leave. There was one more attachment. Anthony looked up. What attachment? She opened another document. The hospital has expanded the audit. His expression changed slightly. Expanded? It now includes contracts from the last 4 years. Anthony leaned back slowly. 4 years? Yes. That's broader than expected. Linda waited. Anthony forced a smile. It won't be a problem. But after she left the office, he reopened the email. He read every line again, then once more. For the first time in months, a feeling he rarely experienced settled quietly into the room. Not fear. Not yet. Unease. Back at the hospital, Nathan Brooks arrived carrying a slim leather briefcase. Melissa greeted him with a tired smile. You came. I wanted to see Lucas. She thanked him. After checking on the boy, Nathan asked if they could speak privately. They stepped into a quiet family consultation room. Nathan closed the door. I received your screenshots, Melissa nodded. I've kept everything. I know. He placed several folders on the table. I've started organizing the timeline. Melissa looked puzzled. So soon, Nathan answered gently. The best evidence is always preserved immediately. Melissa sighed. I still don't want this to become a war. Nathan looked directly at her. I don't believe it will. Then what will it become? He paused before answering. A record. A complete one. Melissa considered that. She had never wanted revenge. She still didn't. But she did want something increasingly important. The truth. Not louder, simply complete. Nathan slid a small digital recorder across the table. This contains copies of security footage requests. Melissa looked at it. I didn't ask for those. I know. The hospital preserved them automatically. What if I never need them? Nathan smiled. Then no one will be happier than I am. He closed the briefcase. But if one day someone questions what happened, he let the sentence remain unfinished. Melissa understood. Facts, dates, records, emails, camera footage. Every piece was quietly finding its place. Neither of them realized that somewhere else inside the same hospital, Rebecca Collins had just uncovered the first procurement report that connected Walker Medical Technologies to a series of unusually expensive equipment contracts. She read the figures twice, then reached for another file. Something wasn't adding up. Rebecca Collins had built her career on a simple belief. Numbers rarely lied. People did. As Chief Internal Auditor for North Valley Health System, she had reviewed thousands of contracts over the years. Most discrepancies had reasonable explanations. Delayed shipments, fluctuating market prices, emergency purchases during supply shortages. Healthcare rarely operated under perfect conditions, but the procurement files now spread across her desk felt different. Not because they contained one dramatic irregularity, because they revealed a pattern. She opened another spreadsheet, Walker Medical Technologies. The name appeared again, and again, and again. Rebecca highlighted several columns. Identical equipment, purchased 6 months apart, nearly 23% more expensive. No explanation. She compared another contract. The same devices, different supplier, lower price, comparable warranty, faster delivery. Yet North Valley had repeatedly selected Walker Medical Technologies. Rebecca leaned back. That's interesting. She wasn't accusing anyone, not yet. Curiosity always came before conclusions. She pressed the intercom. Could you ask procurement to send me every bidding document related to Walker Medical over the past 4 years? Her assistant answered immediately. I'll have them here within the hour. Rebecca glanced toward the email authorizing the expanded audit. The request had originated from the board. She still didn't know why the timing had suddenly changed. Only Margaret Sullivan and the board's legal counsel knew that the new owner had quietly requested a comprehensive review of every major vendor relationship before signing any future contracts. Melissa Martin's name appeared nowhere in those documents, exactly as she had instructed. Meanwhile, Melissa spent another morning beside Lucas's hospital bed. Sunlight poured through the large windows of the pediatric cardiac intensive care unit. Lucas remained weak, but his color had begun returning. When he slowly opened his eyes, Melissa immediately leaned forward. Hi, sweetheart. His voice was barely louder than a whisper. Mom, she smiled. I'm right here. Did I sleep? You had surgery. He frowned slightly, trying to remember. My chest hurts. I know. Dr. Emily Carter entered quietly. That's expected. Lucas looked toward her. Did you fix my heart? The physician smiled. We worked very hard. Lucas considered the answer seriously before asking, So? Is it better? Dr. Carter nodded. Yes. His tiny shoulders relaxed. Good. Within moments, he drifted back to sleep. Melissa looked at Dr. Carter. Thank you. The doctor shook her head gently. Thanked the entire team. She checked Lucas's chart. His recovery is progressing exactly as we'd hoped. Melissa allowed herself another deep breath. It had been days since breathing felt effortless. Across the city, Anthony Walker stood before a mirror adjusting his tie. Today's meeting mattered, perhaps more than any meeting in his professional career. Walker Medical Technologies had spent almost a year negotiating a comprehensive supply agreement with North Valley Health System. The contract would guarantee millions of dollars in annual revenue. It would also establish Anthony's company as one of the region's dominant medical suppliers. He admired his reflection. Success looked convincing. His phone rang. Kevin Mitchell, the company's chief financial officer. Anthony answered. Morning. Kevin sounded unusually serious. We need to discuss the hospital audit. Anthony frowned. What about it? They're requesting additional procurement documentation. I already know. It's more extensive than I expected. Anthony walked toward his office window. How extensive? They want internal pricing approvals. Fine. They also requested executive communications. Anthony stopped. Emails? Yes. Anthony remained silent. Kevin continued carefully. They're asking for correspondence related to vendor negotiations. Anthony forced a laugh. That's routine. Kevin wasn't convinced. I've been through a lot of audits. This doesn't feel routine. Anthony's tone hardened. We have nothing to hide. I hope you're right. Anthony ended the call shortly afterward. For several seconds, he stared through the office window overlooking downtown Boston. Everything remained under control. He repeated that thought twice. By the third repetition, it sounded less convincing. Back at North Valley Health System, Margaret Sullivan chaired a regularly scheduled executive meeting. Department directors filled the conference room. Patient satisfaction scores, staffing reports, equipment maintenance, budget forecasts. The meeting proceeded normally until Rebecca Collins entered, carrying several thick binders. Margaret looked up. You found something. Rebecca chose her words carefully. I found enough to recommend continuing. One board member asked, anything illegal? I don't know. Anything unethical? Rebecca paused. I believe there are questions that deserve answers. She distributed summary reports. No accusations, only comparisons. Pricing histories, competitive bids, procurement timelines, executive approvals. Every page contained documented facts. Margaret reviewed the material quietly. Has anyone outside this room seen these? No. Good, Rebecca continued. I'd also recommend postponing any new vendor contracts until the audit is complete. No one objected. The recommendation passed unanimously. Again, Melissa's identity remained absent from every conversation. She still had not attended a single board meeting as owner. She preferred learning before leading. That afternoon, Nathan Brooks visited Melissa once more. Lucas had been transferred from intensive care to a regular pediatric cardiac room. Coloring books covered part of his bedside table. A stuffed dinosaur rested beneath one arm. For the first time since surgery, he smiled when Nathan entered. Mr. Brooks. Nathan laughed. You remembered me? You brought puzzles. I did. Lucas nodded proudly. I finished them. Nathan congratulated him before turning toward Melissa. May we talk? She followed him into the hallway. Nathan spoke quietly. The ownership transition is fully complete. Melissa nodded. I assumed so. There's one remaining issue. What is it? The board wants you present during next week's strategic meeting. Melissa looked uncertain. Is that necessary? They're approving several major decisions. She understood. What about my identity? It will remain confidential until you decide otherwise. Melissa looked through the window toward Lucas. I don't want him involved in any of this. He won't be. Nathan hesitated. There's another reason. What? The Walker medical contract. Melissa looked back at him. What about it? The board may reject it. Because of me? No. Because of the audit. Melissa remained silent. Nathan continued. If the findings become serious enough. He stopped. Melissa finished the sentence herself. Everything changes. Nathan nodded. Yes. Later that evening, Anthony hosted another dinner with potential investors. Expensive crystal glasses reflected soft golden light. Conversations centered on expansion, growth, market share. Anthony spoke confidently. Our North Valley agreement is essentially finalized. One investor smiled. Congratulations. Anthony lifted his glass. It's only a matter of paperwork. Across the room, Linda Foster quietly entered carrying her tablet. She approached discreetly. I'm sorry to interrupt. Anthony frowned. What is it? She lowered her voice. The hospital postponed the signing. Anthony blinked. Postponed. They cited ongoing internal review. His smile disappeared. For how long? They didn't say. Several investors noticed the change in his expression. Anthony forced another smile. Nothing important. But inside, certainty began giving way to irritation. This wasn't how negotiations usually unfolded. Someone inside the hospital was slowing everything down. He simply didn't know who. The following morning, Rebecca Collins received another shipment of archived procurement records. As she opened the oldest binder, a single invoice slipped onto her desk. It wasn't the amount that caught her attention. It was the signature. The executive approval belonged to someone Anthony had repeatedly claimed was never involved in purchasing decisions. Rebecca compared it with 3 other contracts. The same signature, the same pattern, the same unusually inflated pricing. She reached for her phone. Margaret. Yes. I think we've just crossed from unusual. She looked once more at the documents before finishing. Into something much more serious. Margaret Sullivan did not respond immediately. She had spent more than 30 years in hospital administration, and experience had taught her that the most dangerous mistakes were often made by people who reacted before understanding. She closed the folder in front of her and looked across her office at Rebecca Collins. What exactly did you find? Rebecca laid 3 contracts side by side across the conference table. They all involve Walker Medical Technologies. Margaret leaned forward. The same equipment. Rebecca nodded. The same cardiac monitoring systems. She pointed toward the first contract. Purchased 4 years ago. Then the second. Purchased again 2 years later. Finally the third. And upgraded last year. Margaret studied the figures. They're expensive. Rebecca slid another document beside them. They're also consistently priced well above comparable market rates. Margaret remained silent. Rebecca continued. Normally, that wouldn't be enough. But every competing bid disappeared before the final approval. Margaret looked up. Disappeared? They're missing. You mean lost? Rebecca answered carefully. I mean missing. There was a difference. Hospitals misplaced paperwork from time to time. Entire groups of competing bids rarely vanished from procurement files. Margaret folded her hands. What do you recommend? Rebecca did not hesitate. A complete review before we approve another dollar. Margaret nodded once. Do it. She paused before adding, and don't discuss this outside the audit team. Rebecca understood immediately. Of course. Neither woman realized how closely the timing of the audit would soon intersect with Anthony Walker's greatest professional ambition. 3 days later, Lucas had improved enough to walk short distances through the pediatric ward. Melissa walked beside him at exactly the pace he could manage. One careful step, then another. His small hand remained wrapped tightly around hers. Dr. Emily Carter watched from the nurse's station with quiet satisfaction. He's stronger today, one nurse observed. Dr. Carter smiled. Children are remarkable. Lucas stopped beside a large aquarium filled with brightly colored tropical fish. He pressed one hand gently against the glass. They don't know they're in a hospital. Melissa smiled. No. They just keep swimming. Lucas watched them for several moments. I think people should have more fish. Melissa laughed softly. Why? They make everybody quieter. Nearby nurses smiled without interrupting. For a few precious minutes, Lucas looked like an ordinary little boy again, instead of a heart patient recovering from emergency surgery. Melissa silently treasured every second. Nathan Brooks arrived shortly before noon, carrying another leather portfolio. Melissa recognized the expression on his face. Something important had happened. After checking on Lucas, they stepped into a nearby consultation room. Nathan closed the door behind them. The acquisition is officially complete. Melissa nodded. I expected that. Nathan smiled. Legally complete. He placed several certified documents on the table. Corporate ownership certificates, board resolutions, bank confirmations, federal filings. Everything had been finalized. Melissa slowly turned each page. So it's done. Yes. Nathan sat across from her. As of 48 hours ago, Martin Healthcare Trust officially owns 100% of North Valley Health System. Melissa remained remarkably calm. Nathan had expected surprise. Instead, she simply asked, how many people know? 7. The board, my legal team, the banking representatives. And you? Melissa looked relieved. I'd like to keep it that way. Nathan smiled. I thought you would. He opened another folder. The board has agreed. No public announcement. No press conference. No media interviews. Melissa thanked him quietly. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Can I still come here as Lucas's mother? Nathan looked almost amused. You own the hospital. I know, but I don't want nurses wondering whether every conversation is being evaluated. They won't. You gave them very clear instructions. Melissa remembered exactly what she had written months earlier. No employee should receive special treatment because of ownership. No patient should ever be treated differently because of influence. The hospital existed for patients first. Everything else came second. Nathan placed one final envelope on the table. The board would like you to attend next Friday's strategic meeting. Melissa looked at it without opening it. Is attendance required? They strongly recommend it. She sighed quietly. I was hoping to wait until Lucas recovered. Nathan understood. I know. But there's another issue. Melissa raised her eyes. The Walker medical contract. Across town, Anthony Walker stood confidently before his executive leadership team. A large digital screen displayed the title, North Valley expansion strategy. Anthony pointed toward projected revenue charts. This agreement changes everything. Around the table sat department heads: Kevin Mitchell, Linda Foster, vice presidents of sales, operations directors, regional managers. Anthony continued. Once the hospital signs, we'll double our market share in pediatric cardiac equipment. One executive asked, "When is the signing ceremony?" Anthony smiled. "Next week." Kevin hesitated. "I thought the hospital postponed it." Anthony dismissed the concern. "They're reviewing paperwork. Nothing unusual." Kevin remained unconvinced. "The audit appears extensive." Anthony turned toward him. "Kevin?" "Yes." "We've completed dozens of hospital contracts." "I know." "This one will be no different." No one argued, but several executives exchanged uncertain glances. Anthony noticed. He simply interpreted their silence as unnecessary caution. Later that afternoon, Rebecca Collins entered the secure document archive beneath hospital administration. Rows of shelving stretched across the temperature-controlled room. Archived contracts, invoices, vendor correspondence, insurance records, everything carefully indexed. A record specialist greeted her. "What are you looking for today?" "Procurement committee minutes." "What year?" "All 4 years involving Walker Medical Technologies." The specialist disappeared into the stacks. 20 minutes later, several heavy storage boxes rested on a rolling cart. Rebecca began reading. Meeting after meeting, recommendation after recommendation, vote after vote. Then she stopped. One committee meeting contained handwritten notes, unlike every other file. A director had written, "Recommendation changed after executive discussion." Rebecca frowned. She searched the following pages. No explanation, no attached memorandum, no meeting transcript, nothing. She marked the page. Several meetings later, another note. Outside recommendation requested. Again, no explanation. By evening, Rebecca had identified 7 separate procurement decisions altered after undocumented executive conversations. Patterns, always patterns. She photographed every page for the audit record. Then she called Margaret. "I've confirmed something." "What?" The purchasing committee wasn't always making the final decisions. Margaret grew quiet. "Who was?" "I don't know yet. But someone overruled them repeatedly." That evening, Melissa finally convinced herself to leave Lucas's room long enough for dinner. The hospital cafeteria remained surprisingly busy. Doctors, visitors, night shift nurses, families. Everyone carried different worries. Melissa selected a simple bowl of soup and sat alone near a large window. She appreciated anonymity. No one recognized her. A young mother approached hesitantly. "Excuse me." Melissa looked up. "I'm sorry to bother you." "It's all right." The woman smiled nervously. "I saw you a few days ago." Melissa nodded politely. "Our sons were admitted the same night." "I remember." "My little boy had appendicitis." "I'm glad he's okay." "So am I." The woman hesitated. "I wanted to thank you." Melissa looked confused. "For what?" "I saw what happened." Melissa immediately understood. "Anthony, you stayed so calm." The woman continued softly. "I don't think I could have." Melissa offered a gentle smile. "I wasn't calm. You looked calm. I was terrified." The woman looked surprised. Melissa stirred her soup. Sometimes courage simply looks quiet. The woman thanked her once more before returning to her own table. Melissa watched her leave. She hadn't realized anyone remembered that night. Apparently, more people had been watching than Anthony ever imagined. The next morning, Margaret Sullivan convened a confidential meeting of the board's executive committee. Only 5 directors attended. Nathan Brooks joined remotely by secure video conference. Rebecca Collins summarized the audit. Additional procurement reviews, pricing inconsistencies, missing competitive bids, undocumented approval changes, no conclusions, only verified facts. When she finished, the room remained silent. Finally, one director asked, "What happens if Walker Medical requests contract approval before the audit ends?" Margaret answered without hesitation. "We wait." Another director frowned. "They won't like that." Margaret's voice remained steady. "Our responsibility isn't to make vendors comfortable. It's to protect patients." Nathan Brooks nodded from the screen. "I agree." Margaret looked around the room. Then it settled. No contract, no announcement, no explanation beyond standard governance procedures. She closed the meeting. None of them realized Anthony had already begun inviting investors to celebrate a contract he no longer controlled. And none of them knew that within days he would walk into a boardroom believing he was about to secure the greatest victory of his career. Instead, he would meet the woman he had spent years believing possessed nothing at all. Friday morning arrived with the kind of clear autumn sky that often made Boston appear calm, regardless of the storms unfolding inside its buildings. Anthony Walker stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, fastening the last button of his charcoal suit jacket. Today was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. North Valley Health System represented the largest client Walker Medical Technologies had ever pursued. Months of negotiations, dozens of presentations, factory inspections, financial reviews, and private dinners with consultants had all led to this moment. Even with the recent audit, Anthony remained convinced everything would conclude in his favor. He checked his reflection one final time. Confidence was part of leadership. That was what he always told his employees. His phone vibrated. "Kevin Mitchell." Anthony answered while collecting his briefcase. "We're leaving in 10 minutes. Kevin's voice sounded more restrained than usual. "I reviewed the agenda they sent last night." "So, there isn't a contract signing listed?" Anthony frowned. "It's probably implied." Kevin hesitated. "There are 2 agenda items that concern me." Anthony walked toward the elevator. "What are they?" "Vendor governance review and executive procurement findings." Anthony smiled dismissively. "They're discussing policy." "Maybe." "They've invited legal counsel." Anthony stopped walking for the first time that morning. "Hospital lawyers attend major meetings." "I know." Kevin paused. "I just think we should be prepared." Anthony pressed the elevator button. "We've done nothing wrong." Kevin did not answer immediately. I hope that's exactly what today proves. At North Valley Health System, Melissa Martin stood beside Lucas's hospital bed, helping him finish breakfast. His appetite had finally returned. He carefully stacked small pieces of toast into what he insisted was a dinosaur. Melissa laughed quietly. "I've never seen a dinosaur made of toast." Lucas grinned. "It's a new species." "What does it eat?" "Pancakes." "Of course." Before Melissa could continue playing along, there was a gentle knock on the door. Nathan Brooks entered. He carried no briefcase this time, only a single dark blue folder. Lucas smiled. "Hi, Mr. Brooks." Nathan smiled back. "You look stronger every time I see you." "I walked all the way to the fish yesterday." "That's impressive." Lucas nodded proudly. After exchanging a few more words, Nathan looked toward Melissa. "When you have a moment." She understood. "I'll be right back." Melissa kissed Lucas gently on the forehead. "I'll only be gone a few minutes." "I'll be here." "I know." She followed Nathan into a nearby consultation room. The moment the door closed, Nathan handed her the folder. The board finalized today's agenda. Melissa opened it. She quietly read every page. Vendor governance review, audit summary, strategic procurement, executive session, ownership confirmation. She looked up. "They moved it to today." Nathan nodded. "Margaret believes waiting longer creates unnecessary risk." Melissa remained silent. Nathan continued. The audit uncovered additional procurement issues. "Serious? Potentially." Melissa closed the folder. "I don't want anyone assuming today's meeting is about my marriage." "It isn't. It can't become personal." Nathan nodded immediately. "The board agrees." She looked relieved. The evidence must stand on its own. "It will." She took a slow breath. "When do I enter?" "Not at the beginning." Melissa looked surprised. "No." Nathan shook his head. "Margaret wants the board to complete the procurement discussion before introducing the new owner." Melissa understood why. If ownership were announced first, every later decision might appear personal. If the evidence came first, the facts would speak before emotions entered the room. "I think that's the right decision." "So do I." At exactly 10 o'clock, the board conference room began filling. Margaret Sullivan greeted directors individually. Rebecca Collins arranged several organized binders at one end of the polished conference table. Each contained color-coded tabs, procurement records, financial analyses, vendor comparisons, committee minutes. Nathan Brooks quietly reviewed legal documents. No one appeared hurried. Every movement reflected careful preparation. Anthony and Kevin Mitchell arrived precisely on schedule. Margaret welcomed them warmly. "Mr. Walker." "Chairwoman Sullivan." Anthony shook hands confidently around the room. He immediately noticed something unusual. No ceremonial folders, no photographers, no refreshments prepared for a signing celebration. Only thick audit binders. He dismissed the observation. Perhaps they planned to complete business first. The meeting officially began. Margaret opened with routine governance matters, budget updates, patient satisfaction, capital improvement projects. Anthony waited patiently. After nearly 20 minutes, she turned toward Rebecca Collins. "Our next agenda item." Rebecca stood. "The Internal Audit Office has completed the preliminary review requested by the board." Anthony folded his hands, still unconcerned. Rebecca projected the first slide. Hospital Procurement Overview. She spoke calmly. "No conclusions are being presented today." Anthony relaxed slightly. "Only documented observations." The next slide appeared. Vendor cost comparison. Anthony recognized Walker Medical Technologies immediately. Rebecca continued. "Over the past 4 fiscal years, several procurement categories demonstrated pricing inconsistencies." Anthony raised one eyebrow. She displayed another chart. Competitive bids, average market pricing, purchase frequency, everything carefully sourced. No dramatic language, only verified numbers. Anthony leaned toward Kevin. "They're comparing vendors." Kevin whispered, "I know." Rebecca continued. "In several purchasing cycles, Walker Medical Technologies submitted the highest-priced proposal." Anthony remained calm. Higher prices alone proved nothing. Quality often justified additional cost. Rebecca seemed to anticipate that thought. The audit therefore examined warranty terms, maintenance agreements, equipment performance, and delivery schedules. She clicked to another slide. Comparable. Anthony's confidence diminished slightly. The room remained silent. Rebecca never looked toward Anthony personally. She addressed only the board. We also reviewed procurement committee documentation. Another slide appeared. Committee recommendations. Anthony noticed handwritten annotations. Rebecca spoke carefully. In 7 documented instances, procurement recommendations changed following executive discussions. One board member asked, "Were those discussions documented?" No. Were explanations recorded? No. Anthony finally spoke. "Chairwoman." Margaret nodded. "Yes, Mr. Walker." "Is there a concern regarding our company?" Margaret answered professionally. "The audit concerns procurement governance." Anthony smiled politely. "Then perhaps I can answer questions." Rebecca responded before Margaret could. "Thank you. If clarification becomes necessary, we'll certainly ask." Anthony sat back again. He didn't like being excluded from the discussion. Kevin quietly watched the room. Something felt different. The atmosphere lacked confrontation. That worried him more than confrontation would have. Nobody seemed interested in arguing. They seemed interested only in facts. Meanwhile, Melissa remained upstairs with Lucas. She deliberately avoided checking the time every few minutes. Nathan had promised someone would come for her when appropriate. Until then, she was simply Lucas's mother. Lucas finished another drawing. "This one's for Dr. Carter." Melissa looked at the colorful picture. The surgeon wore an oversized superhero cape. Melissa smiled. "I think she'll love it." "Do surgeons get capes?" "I don't think so." "They should." Melissa laughed again. "They probably deserve them." A nurse entered carrying medications. Lucas accepted them without complaint. After the nurse left, he looked toward Melissa. "Mom." "Yes." "Is Dad coming today?" The question caught her off guard. She answered honestly. "I don't know." Lucas nodded quietly. "He was busy?" Melissa looked down for a moment. "Yes. He works a lot." Lucas seemed satisfied with the explanation. Children often accepted answers adults struggled to believe. Melissa gently brushed his hair away from his forehead. She silently promised herself something. No matter what happened downstairs, Lucas would never become a weapon in any dispute. He deserved better. Back inside the board meeting, Rebecca reached the final section of her presentation. "We requested additional documentation from Walker Medical Technologies." Anthony nodded confidently. "We provided everything requested." Rebecca looked toward him for the first time. "Most of it." The room grew noticeably quieter. She displayed another document. "Several executive communications referenced in procurement files have not yet been produced." Anthony answered immediately. "I'll have my staff locate them." Rebecca nodded. "We appreciate that." No accusation, no raised voices, only another documented fact. Margaret folded her hands. "Thank you, Miss Collins." Rebecca returned to her seat. The chairwoman looked around the room. "The procurement discussion is temporarily concluded." Anthony expected the contract conversation to begin next. Instead, Margaret looked toward Nathan Brooks. "Counselor." Nathan stood slowly. "I have one additional matter before the board proceeds." Anthony frowned. He had never seen this attorney before. Nathan placed a sealed legal folder onto the conference table. Every board member already seemed to know what it contained. Anthony glanced at Kevin. Kevin shrugged. Nathan calmly broke the seal. The next agenda item concerns the formal acknowledgement of North Valley Health System's new controlling owner. Anthony blinked. New owner. No one had mentioned a completed acquisition. The room became completely silent. Nathan looked toward the conference room doors. They're here. At that exact moment, the doors opened. Every conversation in the boardroom stopped. The conference room doors opened slowly, not with theatrical drama, but with the quiet confidence of people following a carefully planned agenda. Nathan Brooks stepped aside. Melissa Martin entered alone. She wore a simple navy business suit, her hair neatly tied back exactly as it had been every day she sat beside Lucas's hospital bed. She carried no expensive handbag, no jewelry beyond her wedding ring, and no expression of triumph. She looked exactly like the woman Anthony had left in the emergency department days earlier. Anthony frowned. His first thought was confusion. His second was irritation. He turned toward Margaret Sullivan. "I'm sorry, but I believe this meeting is confidential." Margaret answered calmly, "It is." Anthony looked at Melissa. "Then why is my wife here?" Melissa said nothing. She quietly nodded to several members of the board. To Anthony's surprise, every one of them greeted her respectfully. "Good morning, Miss Martin." Margaret was the first to speak. "Good morning?" Rebecca Collins followed. "It's good to see you again." Then another director smiled. "Thank you for coming." Anthony slowly looked around the room. Something wasn't right. He had never seen Melissa meet any of these people. Yet they spoke as though they had known her for months. Kevin Mitchell noticed it too. He leaned slightly toward Anthony. "Do you know these people have met before?" Anthony whispered back, "No." Nathan closed the conference room doors. The soft click echoed through the room. He returned to the head of the table. "Before today's meeting continues, several legal matters must be entered into the official minutes." Anthony folded his arms. "What legal matters?" Nathan opened the certified folder. "The ownership transition of North Valley Health System." Anthony relaxed slightly. "So the acquisition finally closed." "It did." "I'd like to congratulate the new owners." Nathan smiled politely. "I believe you'll have the opportunity." Anthony nodded confidently. "Excellent." He assumed a representative from some investment fund would appear after a brief introduction. Instead, Nathan placed several certified documents before Margaret Sullivan. She reviewed the signatures one final time. Everything had already been verified. Bank confirmations, state filings, corporate resolutions, trust certifications. Every page carried official seals. Margaret looked toward Melissa. "Are you prepared to proceed?" Melissa answered quietly. "Yes." Anthony glanced between them. He still believed he had misunderstood something. Nathan addressed the board. "For the official record, Martin Healthcare Trust completed its acquisition of 100% of North Valley Health System 48 hours ago." Several directors nodded. Nathan continued. "All regulatory approvals have been received. All financial transfers have been completed. All governance documents have been executed." Anthony smiled. Everything sounded routine, until Nathan spoke again. "In accordance with the trust agreement established by Charles Martin," Anthony barely noticed the name. "The sole beneficiary and controlling trustee is Melissa Martin." Silence. No one moved. Anthony blinked once. He looked toward Melissa, then back toward Nathan. "I'm sorry." Nathan waited. "I don't think I heard that correctly." Nathan repeated the sentence exactly as written. The sole beneficiary and controlling trustee of Martin Healthcare Trust is Melissa Martin. Anthony laughed once. A short, uncertain laugh. My wife. Yes. Anthony shook his head. There must be another Melissa Martin. Nathan calmly slid the certified trust documents across the table. There is not. Anthony stared at the papers. He didn't reach for them. He simply looked. Margaret spoke next. As chairwoman of the board, I officially recognize Melissa Martin as the lawful owner and controlling authority of North Valley Health System. She paused. Welcome. Every board member applauded politely, not loudly, not ceremonially, respectfully. Melissa acknowledged them with a small nod before taking the empty seat beside Margaret, the seat at the head of the table. Anthony continued standing. He had forgotten to sit. Kevin quietly pulled at Anthony's sleeve. You should. Anthony remained frozen. Melissa opened a leather folder. Not once did she look toward Anthony. Not once did she smile. Not once did she display satisfaction. She simply prepared for the meeting she had spent months arranging. Anthony finally found his voice. When... He swallowed. When did this happen? Nathan answered. The acquisition process began several months ago. Anthony looked directly at Melissa. You never told me. Melissa met his eyes for the first time. You never asked. The answer was calm, not sarcastic, simply factual. Anthony stared at her. You bought a hospital? A hospital system, Nathan corrected gently. Anthony looked around the room again. This has to be some misunderstanding. Margaret answered. It is not. Anthony laughed nervously. My wife doesn't have that kind of money. Nathan quietly opened another folder. Would you like the financial confirmations? Anthony didn't answer. Nathan continued anyway. The acquisition was financed entirely through Martin Healthcare Trust. He handed copies to each board member. The banking institutions involved have independently verified every transfer. Rebecca Collins added quietly, Our legal department completed due diligence over the past several months. Anthony looked toward Kevin. Kevin was already reading the documents. His face had turned noticeably pale. They're certified, Kevin whispered. Anthony ignored him. He looked back toward Melissa. Your father? Melissa nodded once. My father established the trust. Anthony frowned. You told me he invested in healthcare charities. He did. Anthony's thoughts raced through years of conversations. Charles Martin, quiet, generous, never flashy, always modest. Anthony had never asked detailed questions about his finances because he assumed there wasn't much to discuss. He suddenly realized how little he had actually known. You inherited all of this, Melissa answered honestly. I inherited responsibility. The sentence lingered in the room. No one interrupted it. Margaret looked toward Nathan. Please continue. Nathan nodded. With ownership now formally acknowledged, today's remaining agenda concerns vendor governance. Anthony finally remembered why he had come. The contract. Margaret folded her hands. Yes. Anthony forced himself to regain composure. He straightened his jacket. Whatever Melissa owned, business was still business. My company submitted the strongest proposal. Rebecca Collins calmly opened another binder. That remains under review. Anthony frowned. Based on what? The audit. Anthony looked toward Melissa. She remained completely silent. Not once had she expressed an opinion regarding Walker Medical Technologies. Anthony interpreted that silence as uncertainty. He decided to use it. Melissa. Every head turned toward him. We're married. She waited. You know the quality of my company. Melissa answered carefully. I know the importance of proper procedures. Anthony forced a smile. You don't seriously expect strangers to understand my business better than you. Melissa looked toward Margaret before speaking. My personal relationship with any vendor is irrelevant. Anthony blinked. What? I will not participate in decisions involving your company. The room remained silent. Melissa continued. The board and the audit team will complete their work independently. Anthony stared at her. You'd recuse yourself. Yes. Even though you're the owner. Especially because I'm the owner. Several directors exchanged quiet glances of approval. Margaret spoke into the official microphone used for board records. Let the minutes reflect that Miss Martin has voluntarily recused herself from procurement decisions involving Walker Medical Technologies due to a personal conflict of interest. The corporate secretary typed every word. Anthony suddenly realized something unsettling. Melissa wasn't protecting him. She also wasn't attacking him. She was protecting the integrity of the process. That made everything far more dangerous. Because if the board eventually rejected his company, no one could accuse her of using personal power. The evidence alone would decide. Rebecca Collins quietly placed another stack of binders onto the conference table. There is one final matter before the board begins deliberations. Anthony looked toward the documents. What now? Rebecca met his eyes calmly. We've completed the first phase of our financial review. She rested one hand on the top binder. And we've identified several transactions that require formal explanation. Anthony's confidence, already shaken by Melissa's revelation, began slipping away for the first time. He had entered the room expecting to sign the largest contract of his career. Instead, he was about to answer questions he had never expected anyone to ask. The atmosphere inside the boardroom changed almost imperceptibly. Until that moment, Anthony Walker had believed the meeting revolved around ownership. Now he realized ownership had merely been the introduction. The real discussion was only beginning. Rebecca Collins stood beside the large presentation screen with a remote control in one hand and a thick binder in the other. She looked neither angry nor triumphant. Auditors were trained to remove emotion from evidence. Facts did not require volume. They required clarity. Margaret Sullivan addressed the room. Before we continue, I'd like to remind everyone that today's discussion concerns documented findings. She looked toward Anthony. Mr. Walker, you'll have every opportunity to respond. Anthony nodded stiffly. I appreciate that. Rebecca projected the first slide. Vendor procurement timeline. Dates filled the screen. Contract numbers, approval stages, payment schedules. Every entry matched documents already distributed to the board. Rebecca spoke calmly. Over the last 4 fiscal years, Walker Medical Technologies participated in 12 competitive procurement processes. Anthony remained composed. That was accurate. We selected the company on 7 occasions. Also accurate. Rebecca clicked to the next slide. During each of those 7 procurements, Walker Medical Technologies submitted proposals that exceeded the average competing bid. Anthony leaned forward. Higher prices don't indicate wrongdoing. Rebecca nodded. We agree. Anthony relaxed slightly. Therefore, she continued, the audit examined additional factors. The next slide appeared. Delivery performance, equipment reliability, warranty coverage, service response time. Anthony studied the figures. Several categories showed only minor differences between Walker Medical and competing suppliers. Rebecca summarized quietly. The premium pricing was not consistently matched by measurable operational advantages. One director asked, "Did patients receive better outcomes?" Rebecca answered honestly. "We found no evidence supporting that conclusion." Anthony cleared his throat. "Our products are built to higher standards." Rebecca acknowledged him. "Your company certainly made that argument." Anthony frowned. "Made? We reviewed the marketing materials." Another click. Projected cost savings. Actual expenditures. The numbers differed significantly. Rebecca continued. "In several cases, projected maintenance savings were never realized." Kevin Mitchell quietly closed his eyes. He remembered those projections. Sales teams often relied on optimistic assumptions. He had warned Anthony more than once. Anthony had insisted aggressive estimates remained within acceptable business practice. Now, every presentation sat inside an audit binder. Melissa remained silent. She sat beside Margaret with her notebook open. Throughout the meeting, she wrote only dates, agenda items, board motions, questions asked. She never interrupted. She never defended Anthony. She never criticized him. Several directors noticed. Her restraint reinforced the credibility of the process. No one could claim the new owner had influenced the audit. Nathan Brooks watched quietly from the opposite side of the room. As legal counsel, he understood something Anthony still did not. The board wasn't trying to defeat him. They were trying to protect themselves. There was a difference. Rebecca advanced to the next section. Committee documentation. Scanned meeting minutes appeared on the screen. Handwritten notes, voting records, approval recommendations. Rebecca pointed toward highlighted passages. These documents indicate that procurement staff initially recommended alternative vendors in 7 separate purchasing cycles. Anthony looked surprised. They recommended competitors? Yes. Why? Rebecca answered honestly. Primarily due to pricing. Anthony responded immediately. Recommendations aren't final decisions. No, they're advisory. Correct. Anthony folded his arms. Then management exercised its discretion. Rebecca nodded. That appears to be what happened. Another director asked, "Do we know why?" Rebecca paused. "We know decisions changed. We don't yet know why." Again, no accusations, only verified facts. Anthony grew increasingly uncomfortable. The questions weren't emotional. They were systematic. Every answer created another question. Rebecca displayed another document. Executive email requests. Anthony immediately recognized the heading. She spoke calmly. The audit requested executive correspondence associated with these procurement decisions. Anthony nodded. My staff provided extensive documentation. Rebecca acknowledged the statement. They provided approximately 80%. Anthony frowned. What does that mean? Rebecca opened another folder. Our document management system references additional email chains. She projected a screenshot. Message thread available. Attachment missing. Anthony stared at the screen. Rebecca continued. The archived references indicate several discussions occurred before final procurement approvals. Anthony answered quickly. Old emails disappear. Nathan Brooks spoke for the first time since ownership had been announced. Corporate retention policies generally preserve executive communications involving procurement. Anthony turned toward him. Generally. Nathan nodded. Yes. Anthony tried another explanation. People change computers. Rebecca answered immediately. We obtained server migration records. Another slide appeared. Email archive successfully transferred. Anthony stopped speaking. Kevin slowly lowered his eyes toward the conference table. He had supervised that migration himself. The records existed. Margaret Sullivan looked around the room. "I'd like to clarify something." Rebecca stepped aside. Margaret continued. "At this stage, the audit has not concluded misconduct." Anthony looked relieved. She finished her sentence. "It has concluded additional explanation is required." The relief disappeared almost immediately. Rebecca moved to the next section, hospital security records. Anthony looked confused. "What do security records have to do with procurement?" Rebecca answered calmly. "Nothing. They relate to another matter." Melissa looked up briefly, only briefly. Rebecca continued. "Following last week's emergency department incident, several employees submitted standard witness reports." Anthony's expression changed. "The hospital documents everything occurring during patient care." Anthony shifted in his chair. "I visited my son." "Yes. We're aware." Rebecca placed several witness statements on the table. Emergency department supervisor, financial services coordinator, charge nurse, emergency physician. Each report carried signatures, timestamps, incident numbers. Anthony looked toward Melissa. She didn't move. Rebecca spoke carefully. "The reports consistently describe a discussion regarding payment authorization." Anthony answered immediately. "My family's medical decisions are private." Nathan responded. "The conversation occurred in a public waiting area." Anthony looked irritated. So multiple witnesses independently documented the exchange." Rebecca displayed another page, security camera index. Anthony frowned. "You recorded me. The hospital continuously records public areas for safety." Anthony looked toward Margaret. "You plan to use surveillance footage," Margaret answered calmly. "The recordings are preserved according to hospital policy." Anthony leaned back. "I haven't committed a crime." "No one said you had," Rebecca continued. "The footage simply confirms the timeline." Anthony rubbed his forehead. "This is unbelievable." Nathan Brooks quietly opened another folder. "I'd like to enter one additional document into today's record." Margaret nodded. "Proceed." Nathan distributed printed screenshots. Anthony immediately recognized them. Melissa's text messages, repeated phone calls, timestamps, voicemail logs. Anthony looked toward Melissa. "You saved those," Melissa answered honestly. "Yes." "Why?" "I save important records." Anthony almost laughed. "You expected this." Melissa looked at him quietly. "No. I hoped I'd never need them." The room became silent again. No one hurried the conversation. Nathan summarized. "The communications establish repeated attempts to contact Mr. Walker during a medical emergency." Anthony defended himself. "I was meeting investors." Rebecca nodded. "The timestamps support that." Anthony looked surprised. "You agree?" "We agree you were in a meeting." He looked relieved. Rebecca finished. "They also established that your wife informed you of your son's condition before surgery." Anthony's relief faded again. Every statement seemed balanced. Every statement also strengthened the timeline. Dr. Emily Carter entered the boardroom at Margaret's request. She still wore her white physician's coat after completing morning rounds. Margaret thanked her for coming. "Doctor, we have only one question." Dr. Carter nodded. "Were the medical recommendations for Lucas Walker clinically necessary?" Dr. Carter answered without hesitation. "Yes." "Could surgery have safely been delayed?" "No." Why? Because delaying intervention significantly increased the risk of permanent heart damage or death. No one spoke. Anthony looked down. Dr. Carter continued. The recommendation was unanimous. Every pediatric cardiac specialist involved reached the same conclusion. Nathan asked one final question. Did you personally explain that recommendation to Mr. Walker? I did. And, Dr. Carter answered quietly, he declined financial authorization. Silence settled across the room. Not because anyone felt shocked anymore, because the evidence no longer came from documents alone. It came from the physician who had fought to save Lucas's life. Rebecca slowly closed her binder. I believe the preliminary presentation is complete. Margaret looked around the table. Does any board member require clarification? No one spoke. Anthony finally realized the most dangerous part of the morning. No one had accused him of being cruel. No one had insulted him. No one had raised a voice. They had simply allowed every document, every email, every witness statement, every hospital record, and every medical opinion to tell exactly the same story. For several long moments, no one in the boardroom spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was procedural. Every director had been given time to review the documents independently. No one wanted a decision influenced by emotion, especially after the extraordinary revelations of the morning. Margaret Sullivan finally broke the silence. Thank you, Dr. Carter. The surgeon nodded politely. If there are no further medical questions, I'd like to return to my patients. Margaret smiled warmly. Of course. And thank you, not only for being here today, but for saving a little boy's life. Dr. Emily Carter looked briefly toward Melissa. I was only one member of the team. Melissa answered quietly. We'll always remember every member. The physician left the room without another word. The doors closed softly behind her. Nathan Brooks made a note in the official minutes. Medical testimony concluded. Margaret folded her hands. The board will now discuss the vendor review. Anthony immediately leaned forward. I'd appreciate the opportunity to respond. You'll have it, Margaret replied. She turned toward Rebecca Collins. Please summarize your recommendation. Rebecca stood once more. She spoke slowly enough that every sentence could be accurately recorded. Based on the preliminary audit, I recommend the following. She looked at the first page. First, all negotiations with Walker Medical Technologies should be suspended until the audit is complete. Anthony's expression hardened. Rebecca continued. Second, an independent forensic accounting firm should review procurement transactions covering the previous 4 fiscal years. Another page. Third, all documentation should be preserved without alteration. She closed the folder. That concludes my recommendation. Anthony spoke before anyone else could. This is completely unnecessary. Margaret looked toward him. You may respond. Anthony stood. He had spent years delivering presentations to investors. He understood confidence. He understood persuasion. He believed both would save him now. Ladies and gentlemen, he paused. My company has served hospitals across New England for years. Several directors listened without expression. We've never been accused of fraud. True, we've consistently delivered high-quality equipment. Also true, we've invested millions into research. Again true. He walked slowly around the end of the conference table. The audit you've seen today identifies administrative questions. He looked toward Rebecca, not criminal conduct. Rebecca nodded. Correct. Anthony smiled. Exactly. He turned back toward the board. So delaying an essential supplier over paperwork benefits no one. Margaret listened carefully. One director finally asked, "Mr. Walker, can you explain why procurement recommendations repeatedly changed?" Anthony answered immediately. Executive leadership often has broader information than purchasing departments, such as long-term relationships, future pricing, strategic partnerships, reasonable answers, but not complete ones. Another director asked, why weren't those reasons documented? Anthony hesitated. They probably should have been. Rebecca quietly wrote down the response. Anthony noticed. You don't need to write every sentence. Rebecca looked up. I write every factual statement. Anthony stopped speaking. He suddenly realized that nearly everyone in the room was taking notes. Corporate secretary, legal counsel, audit team, board members. No opinion disappeared into memory. Everything entered the record. Meanwhile, 40 floors below employees throughout the hospital continued caring for patients, completely unaware that one of the most consequential board meetings in the organization's history was unfolding above them. Melissa had insisted on that. Hospitals should never stop functioning because executives were discussing business. Children still needed medicine. Parents still waited for test results. Emergency departments still received ambulances. Patients came first. Always. Back inside the boardroom, Nathan Brooks received a message on his tablet. He read it quietly. Then he looked toward Margaret. I've just received confirmation. Margaret nodded. May we enter it into today's record? Please. Nathan stood. The independent forensic accounting firm has accepted the board's engagement. Anthony frowned. You already hired them, Margaret answered calmly. No, we retained them. Anthony looked confused. What's the difference? Nathan replied. A hired consultant answers to management. A retained independent investigator answers to the board. Anthony understood immediately. The investigation would not report to him or to Melissa, only to the board. Across town, Federal Examiner David Morrison walked into the Boston office of Grant & Ellis Forensic Accounting. He had worked alongside the firm on several healthcare compliance matters over the years. Senior partner Karen Ellis greeted him. I wasn't expecting to see you. David smiled. I heard North Valley retained your team. Karen nodded. The engagement letter arrived this morning. David looked thoughtful. Healthcare procurement? That's all I know. He hesitated. If you uncover anything involving federal reimbursement programs. Karen finished the sentence. We notify the appropriate agencies. Exactly. Neither of them knew whether the audit would ultimately reveal administrative failures, civil violations, or nothing beyond poor documentation. The process had only begun. Back at Walker Medical Technologies, Kevin Mitchell sat alone inside his office. He had returned early from the board meeting after Anthony instructed him to prepare additional procurement records. Stacks of financial binders covered his desk. Kevin reopened several old contracts. Something bothered him, not because he believed Anthony had intentionally broken the law, because Anthony had often overridden financial advice. Kevin remembered one meeting 3 years earlier. We're pricing ourselves too aggressively, Kevin had warned. Anthony had smiled. They'll still buy. Why? They always do. Kevin had asked another question. How can you be so certain? Anthony had answered without looking up from his laptop. I've built relationships. At the time, Kevin assumed Anthony meant trust. Now, he wasn't so sure. Kevin opened another archive. He compared internal pricing approvals against final invoices. Small differences appeared, then larger ones. Not enough to prove misconduct, enough to justify concern. He quietly copied several files onto an encrypted drive. Not to hide them, to preserve them, just in case. Late that afternoon, Melissa finally returned to Lucas's room. He was sitting upright in bed, reading a children's book about astronauts. His face brightened immediately. "Mom." She smiled. "How's my Explorer?" "I'm on Mars." "Already?" He nodded enthusiastically. "I planted a flag." Melissa sat beside him. "I missed you." "I missed you too." Lucas studied her face. "You look tired." She laughed softly. "I am." "Did you have a meeting?" Melissa paused briefly. "Yes." "Was it boring?" She smiled again. "Very." Lucas looked relieved. "I thought maybe something bad happened." Melissa gently squeezed his hand. "No. Nothing bad happened." She wasn't lying. The meeting had been difficult. Not bad. Bad had happened days earlier, in the emergency department. Everything afterward simply followed the truth wherever it led. That evening, Anthony arrived home long after sunset. The house felt unusually quiet. Melissa and Lucas remained at the hospital. Anthony loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of water. His phone rang. Linda Foster. "What now?" Her voice sounded uneasy. "The investment group canceled tomorrow's meeting." Anthony frowned. "Why?" "They heard about the audit." "From who?" "I don't know. They said they'd prefer to wait until everything is resolved." Anthony closed his eyes. This is getting out of control. Linda hesitated. "There was something else?" "What?" "The hospital formally suspended contract negotiations." Anthony gripped the kitchen counter. "For how long?" "They didn't say." He ended the call without another word. The kitchen suddenly felt much larger than usual. For the first time in years, Anthony was alone, with nothing to distract him. No investors, no presentations, no employees, no applause, only silence. He walked into his home office and opened his laptop. One unread email immediately caught his attention, from North Valley Health System, Office of Legal Affairs. Subject: Preservation Notice. Anthony opened it. The letter instructed Walker Medical Technologies to preserve all documents, emails, financial records, procurement communications, pricing files, and electronic correspondence related to the ongoing audit. Routine language, professional tone, legally significant. Anthony reread one sentence twice. Failure to preserve relevant materials may result in additional legal consequences. He slowly leaned back in his chair. This was no longer merely an internal review. The process had entered a different stage, one governed not by business negotiations, but by legal procedure. And somewhere inside North Valley Hospital, Rebecca Collins had just received another set of archived emails recovered from the company's backup servers. She opened the first message, then the second. By the third email, she quietly reached for the phone. "Margaret?" Her voice remained calm. "But I think you should see this tonight." Margaret Sullivan was still in her office when her phone rang. The building had grown unusually quiet. Most department directors had already gone home. Cleaning crews moved through administrative hallways, and the glow from office lights reflected softly against the windows overlooking Boston. Margaret recognized Rebecca Collins's number immediately. "You found something?" Rebecca answered without hesitation. "I found emails that weren't included in the original production." Margaret sat upright. "Where?" "The hospital's legacy backup server." "I thought everything had already been migrated." "So did I." Rebecca paused. But the backup retained archived correspondence that wasn't copied into the active procurement folders. Margaret's expression remained calm. What do the emails show? I'd rather not summarize them over the phone. Margaret appreciated the restraint. I'll come downstairs. 20 minutes later, they sat together inside the secure audit office. Rebecca projected several emails onto a monitor. Every message had been authenticated through the hospital's information technology department. Metadata, timestamps, sender verification. Nothing had been altered. Margaret carefully read each message. One involved procurement scheduling. Another discussed pricing revisions. None of them alone appeared alarming. Then Rebecca opened the fourth email. Subject: Final recommendation before board review. Margaret noticed one sentence highlighted in yellow. Recommendation should remain confidential until executive approval. She looked toward Rebecca. Who wrote this? Rebecca pointed to the signature block. The hospital's former chief procurement officer. And the recommendation favored another vendor. Margaret continued reading. Several hours later, another email appeared. Subject: executive direction received. The recommendation had changed. Walker Medical Technologies became the selected vendor. Margaret frowned. Is there an explanation? Rebecca shook her head. Not in the email. What about attached documents? There weren't any. Margaret remained silent. Again, no proof of misconduct. But another unexplained change. Another missing justification. Another unanswered question. She finally closed the laptop. We continue. Rebecca nodded. We continue. The following morning, Melissa Martin was helping Lucas build a small model spaceship from plastic blocks. His recovery had exceeded Dr. Emily Carter's expectations. He still tired easily, but his laughter had returned. For Melissa, that sound meant more than every legal document waiting in the administration building. Lucas carefully connected another piece. I think astronauts get scared. Melissa smiled. I think they do. But they still go. They do. Lucas looked thoughtful. So being brave means you're scared. Melissa gently brushed his hair away from his forehead. Usually. He considered that answer seriously. I thought brave people weren't afraid. They're afraid. They just don't let fear decide everything. Lucas nodded. I want to be like that. Melissa kissed the top of his head. You already are. A gentle knock interrupted them. Dr. Emily Carter entered, carrying Lucas's latest test results. I have good news. Lucas grinned. I like good news. Dr. Carter laughed. I know you do. She reviewed the chart. Your heart is healing exactly the way we'd hoped. Melissa exhaled quietly. When can he go home? If everything continues like this, Dr. Carter smiled toward Lucas. Probably tomorrow afternoon. Lucas threw both arms into the air. Yes. The excitement quickly tired him. Melissa laughed softly as he settled back against the pillows. Dr. Carter turned toward Melissa. May I speak with you privately? Melissa nodded. They stepped into the hallway. The physician spoke gently. I know the past week has been overwhelming. It has. I also know there are other matters happening upstairs. Melissa understood what she meant. The board meeting. Dr. Carter nodded. I don't know the details. And I don't want to. Melissa appreciated that honesty. But I do want to tell you something. Melissa waited. I've worked with hundreds of families. She smiled warmly. Lucas never questioned whether his mother would be beside him. Melissa lowered her eyes. He never had to? No, Dr. Carter answered. and children remember that for the rest of their lives. Across the city, Anthony Walker sat inside his attorney's office. Unlike Nathan Brooks's warm conference room, this office reflected corporate efficiency. Dark wood, minimal decoration, shelves filled with legal treatises. Across the desk sat attorney Richard Coleman, a specialist in corporate compliance. Anthony finished explaining the previous day's board meeting. Richard listened without interrupting. When Anthony finally stopped speaking, Richard folded his hands. "I need to ask several direct questions." Anthony nodded. "Go ahead." "Did anyone accuse you of fraud?" "No." "Did anyone accuse you of bribery?" "No." "Did anyone accuse you of criminal conduct?" Anthony shook his head. "No." Richard leaned back. "That's important." Anthony looked relieved. "So, this is manageable." Richard chose his next words carefully. "It depends." "On what?" "Whether the documents support your explanations." Anthony frowned. "They're only asking questions." "Today." Richard looked directly at him. "Audits begin with questions. They sometimes end somewhere else." Anthony remained silent. Richard continued. "I want every procurement document. You'll have them. Every email. I'll authorize access. Every pricing record." Anthony nodded. Richard added one final instruction. "And Anthony." "Yes. Do not delete anything." Anthony looked almost offended. "I wouldn't." Richard held his gaze. "I'm glad to hear that." Later that afternoon, Nathan Brooks met privately with Melissa in a small family consultation room. Lucas was asleep after physical therapy. Nathan placed a slim folder on the table. "The divorce paperwork is ready." Melissa looked at it for several seconds. She didn't touch it immediately. "I never imagined I'd need this." Nathan answered gently. "Most people don't." She finally opened the folder. Petition for dissolution of marriage, request for primary physical custody, financial disclosure, property division. Every page reflected months of preparation. Nathan quietly explained each section. "You aren't requesting punitive damages." "No." "You aren't requesting spousal support." "No." "You aren't seeking control of Anthony's company." Melissa shook her head. "I only want what's necessary." Nathan smiled slightly. "I thought you would." Melissa continued reading. "I don't want Lucas involved in conflict. He won't be. I don't want public attention. We've requested sealed filings where appropriate." She nodded gratefully. Nathan hesitated before speaking again. "There's one more issue." Melissa looked up. "The emergency room incident." "What about it?" Richard had already informed Nathan that Anthony would likely argue the conversation had been misunderstood. Nathan explained carefully. His legal team may claim witnesses interpreted the discussion incorrectly. Melissa remained calm. "The security cameras," Nathan nodded. "They recorded the entire interaction." Melissa looked out the window toward Lucas's room. "I hoped we'd never need them." "I know. But if the facts are challenged, they'll speak for themselves." Nathan smiled. "Exactly." That evening, the North Valley Board held a brief executive session. Melissa attended only the opening minutes. As promised, she recused herself from every discussion involving Walker Medical Technologies. Before leaving the room, she addressed the directors for the first time since becoming owner. She stood quietly. No prepared speech, no dramatic announcement. "I'd like to say only one thing." Every director listened. "My father believed hospitals belong first to patients." She paused. "I accepted responsibility for this system because I share that belief." She looked around the room. I ask only that every decision be based on facts, not on my marriage, not on sympathy, and not on anger. Margaret smiled, almost imperceptibly. Melissa continued. If the evidence clears Walker Medical Technologies, treat them fairly. If the evidence reveals problems, treat them fairly then as well. She gathered her notebook. That's all. Without waiting for applause, Melissa quietly left the boardroom. Several directors remained silent long after the door closed. Finally, one of them spoke. I've served on corporate boards for 22 years. Another looked up. So have I. The first director shook his head slowly. I've never seen an owner voluntarily step away from a decision that personally affected them. Margaret looked toward the closed door. That's precisely why she deserved to own this hospital. Meanwhile, Rebecca Collins returned to her office. A notification appeared on her computer. Additional archived financial records successfully restored. She opened the recovered files. One spreadsheet immediately caught her attention. Vendor pricing adjustments. She compared the figures against previously submitted invoices, then against internal approval documents. The numbers aligned. Almost. One column didn't. A sequence of transfers listed consulting payments to an outside advisory firm she had never seen before. She searched the company name. No employees, no website, recently dissolved. Rebecca slowly picked up the phone. Margaret? She kept her voice steady. I think we've just found where the money started moving. Rebecca Collins rarely allowed herself to feel excitement during an audit. Excitement invited assumptions. Assumptions led investigators away from facts. Still, as she examined the newly restored financial records, she understood that the investigation had reached a turning point. She printed the spreadsheet and carried it directly to Margaret Sullivan's office. Margaret looked up as Rebecca entered. You found another discrepancy. Rebecca laid the documents across the desk. I found a payment trail. Margaret adjusted her glasses. The spreadsheet listed consulting fees paid over a 3-year period. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. Hospitals routinely hired outside consultants. Rebecca pointed to one column. Look here. Margaret followed her finger. Every payment had been approved shortly before Walker Medical Technologies received another procurement award. The consulting firm involved was called Healthcare Strategic Advisors. Margaret frowned. I don't recognize the name. Neither did I. Rebecca handed over another page. I searched every vendor database available to us. And the company no longer exists. Margaret continued reading. When was it dissolved? 6 months ago. Were there employees? Rebecca shook her head. I couldn't identify any. Margaret remained thoughtful. Does that prove anything? No. Rebecca answered immediately. It proves only that additional investigation is justified. Margaret smiled faintly. That's why you're an excellent auditor. Rebecca returned the smile. I've learned that conclusions arrive last. Margaret nodded. Then let's continue following the facts. Later that morning, Melissa Martin stood near the entrance of the pediatric cardiac ward waiting for Dr. Emily Carter. Lucas had just completed another examination. When the physician appeared, she carried encouraging news. His echocardiogram looks excellent. Melissa's shoulders relaxed. So he's really going home, Dr. Carter smiled. Yes. If everything stays stable through this afternoon, we'll discharge him. Melissa closed her eyes for a brief second. The past week suddenly felt heavier now that it was ending. Thank you. You've thanked us enough. I haven't. Dr. Carter laughed softly. You have. Melissa looked through the glass toward Lucas, who was showing a nurse his latest drawing. He can't wait to sleep in his own bed. I imagine neither can you. Melissa smiled. No. There was another brief silence before Dr. Carter spoke again. I've also been informed that the hospital board approved several improvements for pediatric cardiac patients. Melissa looked surprised, though she already suspected where the conversation was leading. What kind of improvements? A new emergency assistance fund. Melissa listened quietly. No child requiring life-saving treatment will face delays because a family cannot immediately meet financial requirements. Melissa lowered her eyes. Dr. Carter continued. The policy will also expand counseling services for parents during medical emergencies. Melissa felt emotion rise unexpectedly. Her father would have approved. That thought alone meant more than any titles she now held. That afternoon, Margaret Sullivan convened a meeting with department directors. Melissa attended not as a symbolic owner, but as the chair responsible for future planning. Around the conference table sat physicians, nursing supervisors, financial officers, operations managers, and patient advocacy representatives. Margaret opened the meeting. Our first agenda item concerns emergency financial policy. The chief financial officer presented current procedures. Families requiring emergency surgery often completed financial authorization, while treatment decisions were already underway. Several department heads admitted the process created unnecessary stress. Melissa listened without interruption. She filled nearly 3 pages of handwritten notes before speaking. I have one question. Everyone turned toward her. When parents arrive through the emergency entrance, she paused. What is the first thing they should be thinking about? One nursing supervisor answered immediately. Their child. Melissa nodded. Exactly. She looked around the room. They shouldn't be calculating bank balances. No one disagreed. Melissa continued. I understand hospitals require financial stability. The finance director nodded. So do I. But there has to be a better balance. She opened another folder. I'd like to establish the Lucas Children's Heart Foundation. Several executives exchanged surprised looks. Melissa explained calmly. The foundation will provide immediate financial assistance for children requiring emergency cardiac treatment. She continued before anyone interrupted. It will operate independently. Every application will be reviewed. Every dollar will be audited. Transparency is non-negotiable. Margaret smiled. I believe your father would be proud. Melissa answered quietly. I hope so. The proposal passed unanimously. No speeches followed. No celebration. Only another practical decision designed to protect families who would never know her name. Meanwhile, Anthony Walker sat inside Walker Medical Technologies, reviewing another letter from North Valley's legal department. This one was shorter than the previous notice, but far more significant. The board requested formal interviews with selected executives involved in procurement decisions. Anthony read the letter twice. Then a third time. Linda Foster knocked gently on his office door. The investors are here. Anthony looked up. Send them in. 3 longtime investors entered. Normally, their conversations focused on expansion. Today, no one discussed growth. One of them spoke first. We've heard about the audit. Anthony nodded. It's procedural. Another investor leaned forward. Will it affect operations? I don't believe so. The third man remained unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. Our concern isn't the audit itself. Anthony frowned. What is it? Uncertainty. Anthony tried reassuring them. "We're cooperating fully." The investors appreciated the answer, but reassurance was not certainty. After the meeting ended, Anthony noticed something he had never experienced before. No one spoke about future projects while leaving. They spoke only about waiting. Waiting for answers. Waiting for reports. Waiting for conclusions. His company's future had become suspended between facts not yet fully understood. The following day, Lucas was officially discharged. Nurses lined the hallway to say goodbye. Not because he had received special treatment, because he had become everyone's favorite patient. He proudly carried his stuffed dinosaur beneath one arm. Dr. Emily Carter knelt beside him. "You have one very important job." Lucas looked serious. "What?" "Listen to your mom." Lucas smiled. "I always do." Melissa laughed. "Almost always." The physician handed Melissa the discharge folder. "Your follow-up schedule is inside." Melissa accepted it carefully. As always, she never treated medical instructions casually. Before leaving, Lucas turned back toward the nurse's station. "I forgot something." He hurried back as fast as his recovering body allowed. From his backpack, he removed a stack of crayon drawings. One for every nurse, one for Dr. Carter, one for the rehabilitation therapist, one even for the cafeteria employee who always brought him chocolate pudding. Melissa watched quietly. Kindness often spread farther than people realized. Several weeks passed. Hospital renovations quietly began. Additional pediatric monitoring equipment arrived. Family counseling rooms were expanded. Emergency admission procedures were simplified. No newspaper reported the changes. Melissa preferred it that way. Recognition had never been her objective. One afternoon, she walked through the pediatric cardiac unit with Margaret Sullivan. Children played in a newly renovated activity room. Parents smiled more often. Waiting areas felt warmer. Margaret looked around proudly. "You've changed this place." Melissa shook her head. "No. The staff changed it. I simply removed some obstacles." Margaret smiled. "That's what good leadership usually looks like." Melissa didn't answer. She simply watched a little girl laugh while blowing bubbles from her hospital bed. For the first time since becoming owner, she felt something deeper than relief. She felt peace. Across the city, however, another investigation continued quietly. Rebecca Collins received the preliminary report from the independent forensic accountants. She scanned the executive summary, then stopped. Attached to the report was a recommendation: refer findings to external authorities for further review. Rebecca slowly closed the folder. The audit was no longer solely an internal hospital matter. It had reached the point where legal authorities would determine what happened next. She immediately picked up the phone. "Margaret?" "Yes." "The independent review is complete." A brief silence followed. "And," Rebecca answered with the same restraint she had shown from the beginning, "the evidence now needs to speak somewhere beyond this hospital." The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of North Valley Health System's executive conference room. For the first time in weeks, the atmosphere inside the building felt calm. Patients continued receiving treatment. Doctors moved through the corridors with practiced confidence. Children laughed in the renovated activity center. The hospital no longer felt like a place burdened by uncertainty. It felt like what Melissa Martin had hoped it would become, a place where healing came before everything else. Upstairs, however, one final meeting remained. Not a celebration, not a confrontation, simply the conclusion of a process that had begun the night Anthony Walker walked away from his son in the emergency department. Margaret Sullivan opened the special board session. "The independent forensic review has concluded. Every director already possessed a copy of the final report. No one hurried to speak. Rebecca Collins summarized the findings exactly as she had summarized every stage of the investigation. The review identified procurement irregularities requiring referral to the appropriate regulatory authorities. She paused. The report does not determine criminal liability. That responsibility belongs to the agencies conducting any future investigation. Another page turned. The board's responsibility is governance. Margaret nodded. Thank you. She looked around the room. Based on the completed audit, I move that North Valley Health System permanently terminate all pending negotiations with Walker Medical Technologies. One director seconded the motion. The vote was unanimous. No applause followed. No satisfaction appeared on anyone's face. It was simply another governance decision entered into the official record. Rebecca closed her binder. Months of careful work had reached its conclusion. The evidence now belonged to the legal process. Several days later, Anthony Walker sat inside a quiet conference room with his attorney Richard Coleman. The regulatory agencies had begun requesting documents. Additional interviews had been scheduled. Several investors had formally withdrawn from future financing discussions. Walker Medical Technologies continued operating, but uncertainty now surrounded every major decision. Anthony looked exhausted. He had slept very little. Richard placed another folder before him. These are the latest requests. Anthony barely looked at them. My board wants me to step aside temporarily. Richard nodded. I expected that. They think my presence creates risk. Richard answered honestly. From a corporate governance perspective, they're probably correct. Anthony stared through the window. Weeks earlier, he had believed the greatest threat to his company came from competitors. He now understood something different. The greatest damage often came from choices people believed no one would ever remember. He quietly asked, "Do you think I'll lose everything?" Richard considered the question carefully. I don't know. Neither does anyone else. The investigations will determine the facts. Anthony nodded slowly. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to negotiate. Only consequences to face. Melissa never attended another meeting involving Anthony's company. As promised, she remained completely removed from every procurement decision connected to Walker Medical Technologies. Her role had been finished the moment she protected the integrity of the process. Instead, she focused entirely on the hospital. Every Tuesday morning, she walked through different departments without announcing her visits. She spoke with nurses before executives, receptionists before department heads, cleaning staff before consultants. She remembered her father's lessons. What do you notice? The question became her own. One afternoon, she stopped beside a young father sitting outside the pediatric intensive care unit. He looked frightened. Financial forms rested untouched in his lap. Melissa sat beside him. First time, he nodded. My daughter. Melissa understood. The social worker will be here soon. I don't know how I'm going to pay. Melissa looked toward the family assistance office across the hallway. You don't have to solve everything today. Within minutes, a patient advocate arrived. The new emergency assistance program immediately began helping the family. The father never knew the quiet woman beside him had created it. Melissa preferred it that way. Kindness did not require recognition. Lucas returned to school 6 weeks after his surgery. His classmates welcomed him with handmade cards. His teacher had reserved a seat near the window because she remembered how much he loved watching birds during recess. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table finishing homework while Melissa prepared dinner. Mom, yes. Can I ask something? Always. Lucas looked thoughtful. Are you the boss of the hospital? Melissa smiled. I help take care of it. Like Dr. Carter takes care of hearts. In a way. Lucas considered that. So everybody has different jobs. They do. He nodded. I think yours is making sure people are nice. Melissa laughed softly. I hope so. Lucas returned to his homework. Children often described complicated truths with remarkable simplicity. The divorce hearing took place quietly several weeks later. There were no reporters waiting outside the courthouse. No dramatic confrontations in crowded hallways. Judge Catherine Morris reviewed the documents before her with careful attention. Anthony appeared noticeably different from the confident executive who had once dismissed his family during business dinners. He looked older, more tired, more reflective. Melissa remained calm. She wore a simple gray suit and carried only a small folder. Nathan Brooks presented the agreed filings. There are no contested property claims. Judge Morris looked toward Melissa. You are requesting primary physical custody of Lucas Walker. Yes, Your Honor. And joint legal decision-making regarding education and health care, provided communication remains appropriate. Yes. Judge Morris turned toward Anthony. Mr. Walker. Anthony spoke quietly. I agree. The judge reviewed the parenting agreement. Then she signed the order. The marriage is hereby dissolved. There was no victory in the room, only closure. As everyone gathered their papers, Anthony finally looked toward Melissa. I owe you an apology. Melissa stopped. He continued. I don't expect forgiveness. She listened. I only wanted you to know. I finally understand what I refused to see. Melissa remained silent for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. I hope you become the father Lucas deserves. Nothing more, nothing less. She turned and walked toward the courthouse doors. She did not look back. Not because she hated Anthony, because her future no longer required revisiting the past. Months later, North Valley Health System dedicated its new Pediatric Family Resource Center. No plaque carried Melissa's photograph. Only a small inscription chosen from Charles Martin's handwritten letter, protect the people before protecting the numbers. Parents passed the words every day, without knowing whose handwriting had inspired them. Melissa preferred anonymity. She had never purchased a hospital to prove anyone wrong. She had purchased it, so another frightened mother might never stand alone, in an emergency hallway, wondering whether money mattered more than her child. That quiet purpose became the true legacy of North Valley. The narrator had known from the beginning that Anthony Walker would lose far more than a contract. He would lose the trust he had mistaken for permanence. Melissa Martin, however, gained nothing she had ever tried to win. She simply kept what she had always protected: her dignity, her compassion, and the quiet strength to walk away without asking the world to witness her victory. There are moments in life when justice doesn't arrive with loud speeches or dramatic confrontations. Instead, it appears in carefully preserved records, honest testimony, patient investigation, and the quiet courage of someone who refuses to abandon their values even after being deeply hurt. Melissa never sought revenge. She chose something far more difficult, letting the truth stand on its own. Anthony's fate was determined not by anger, but by the consequences of his own decisions. And perhaps that is why this story lingers long after it ends. Real strength is rarely the loudest voice in the room. More often, it is the steady hand that signs the right document, the calm heart that protects a child, and the quiet resolve to leave with dignity instead of bitterness. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what your local time is. Every comment reminds us that stories of compassion and accountability connect people across the world. If you'd like to continue following journeys like Melissa's stories where patience, integrity, and justice ultimately find their place, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for spending your time here, and I hope to see you again in the next story.